All right, welcome back to another Owens Recovery Science podcast. It's a beautiful day, Kyle. You know why? It's Sunday.
It's Sunday
Who whooped
after
ass yesterday? My
the
University of
Texas Longhorns did that
Fighting
too.
Longhorns put it to those poor Florida Gators. I mean, it was a mass unit on that side, but it was all good. You know why it's also beautiful? Who else played and lost yesterday, which we'll talk about here later in the podcast.
Georgia.
And even better,
Alabama. Did Alabama lose?
They whooped ass. They won.
No, they
Oklahoma lost, dude.
Oklahoma lost.
All I would need is they was off, and if they lost, this would have been.
I don't know why we would mention that.
I would still be drunk if A&M Oklahoma lost and we won. But
who did Oklahoma lose to? I didn't even see.
Missouri.
Oh, okay. They've been pretty tough the last few years. So.
Yeah, they were calling them Mid-Zuri for a while at the start of this year, but they're getting better, man.
Missouri?
Mid-Zuri.
Mid. Like they're mid. That's the cool kid language that I don't really know how to speak.
Dr. Loenneke is gonna stop talking about it. Yeah, he's just gonna maybe stop kind of listening to this podcast if you.
He's already out.
We'll bring this up here. Well, let's just jump into this, Yuji. I'm going to introduce you here in a minute. Yuji works with my friend Jeremy Loenneke, who is the biggest Oklahoma Sooner fan in the world. And when Oklahoma's winning, all I hear is it's championship, championship this and that. Does Jeremy walk in every Monday now, and are y'all running out of walls for him to punch? Is he just the most miserable lead at your lab right now? Just give me the vibes with Jeremy Loenneke right now.
So this morning, I talked to Ole Miss had a big win against Georgia, and then I'm kind of sorry about tragic kind of loss at the end against Missouri.
Tragic. It was a tragic loss. I like that.
And then Dr. Loenneke is like, don't even mention it right now.
Hold on a minute.
Does he dress up?
Jeremy Loenneke here.
I'm just curious if Jeremy dresses up as Barry Switzer every Halloween, like if that's.
Yeah. And Yuji, am I wrong? You're at Ole Miss. Did I see you carrying the goalposts after the game? Were you part of that group taking them to that beautiful city square downtown?
Yeah. Did you see me in the videos? No, I was just.
You were hanging from it with your shirt off.
You gotta show my body.
Yuji, leave the pants on. Leave the pants on.
Yeah, maybe if I was undergrads, and maybe I would do it, but maybe not right now.
This Ph.D. world, it takes away the fun. I get it. So anyways, it's good stuff. Football, baby. Speaking of football, today we're recording, and ESPN released the reunion piece with Alex Smith, Center for the Intrepid. So Alex and I hung out all week and did some cool footage. He revisited some of our service members. They gave advice to limb salvage service members going through it. And we even brought in, if y'all listen to a podcast prior with Annie Bain, someone in her family that's really suffering with limb salvage, a youngin, and Alex got to spend a lot of time with him, and man, it was pretty
super cool.
Yeah, bringing tears to everyone's eyes. So that's
dude. I was like, when he met Kelly, when that was good. I was like, ooh, onions, something's going on.
Yeah. There's a lot. There's a whole story with this Kelly piece too, man. I think ESPN has something with this, where what happened with her in Paris at the Olympics, and we'll get into that offline. But anyways, if you catch Sunday morning countdown, they're going to air it, and I think they might re-air it tomorrow night on Monday Night Football. But this will be like weeks later, so I don't even know why I'm talking about it. But
we might get it out a little. I'm going to try to get it out quick, but
all right,
got
other big things going on. I'm going to be with the strongman champion. He has the most titles in the world, Brian Shaw, next week on his YouTube. I've been told he's so big he has to turn sideways to go through a door. So
he's 6'9", like 440.
I am not getting a picture next to this guy.
Yeah, dude, you got to
look like a wuss. So we'll be doing that on Monday and talking about blood flow restriction with him. And the big question is, can we ever get a cuff big enough to go around this guy's arm? Because apparently He's
The blue
too big
cuff.
for our blue
I think
cuff.
the blue cuff is what they use for his arm,
Yeah, crazy.
which
So
is
yeah,
what 34 inch
34
diameter.
inch. Yeah, and it barely fits according to our man
Yeah.
here. So all right. And Zach is speaking in Jamaica this weekend. How the hell did the guy without the passport in our group land the keynote
I
speaking engagement in Jamaica? Did he
I
make
don't
it,
know.
Kyle? Because I heard he didn't have a passport up till last week.
Um, I mean, the
Or is he
jury's
gonna make
maybe still out, you know. He might have to like call in some special ops favors or something that he's built up through the years to get in and out of there. I don't know.
Well, good luck, Zach. We'll see
Yeah.
what happens. Be on standby, Kyle. You might be flying to Jamaica Friday.
Woo, okay.
All right. All right. Well, without further ado, I want to get to our guest. You already heard him speak here. So we're excited. As I mentioned, he's in Jeremy's lab at Ole Miss. If anyone listens to us and knows blood flow restriction, you know Jeremy Loenneke is kind of the OG of a lot of blood flow restriction work in their lab. Okay, what they're calling it now, like what they call it now, Yuji, the muscle lab or something like that.
Yeah, it's like kind of hashtag is Ole Miss Muscle, but
Ole Miss muscle, yeah.
our like actual laboratory name is Kevser Almond's applied physiology laboratory. So
Okay.
that's gonna be the whole name. Yeah.
Nice. I like Ole Miss muscle. Just sounds good. So they
It
churn
does.
out tons of work. Yuji's on a lot of paper. He's there working on his PhD currently, and he's got a new paper that is under review. So we just want to put that out. It looks like it's close to being out there, but he's doing really cool things looking at limb occlusion pressures and muscle metaboreflex and things like that. So I think what he's churning out is not only good for research and the exercise fit space, but really clinically a lot of decisions that we make. So I'll just finish up your bio here, Yuji. We know you're there at Ole Miss. You did your bachelor's degree at Ohio Dominican University with a master's in exercise science at Ole Miss. You came here from Ibaraki, Japan. I said that right? And played soccer at Ohio Dominican University. So we have that in common, both soccer players. Your parents were probably proud of you being a soccer player. I grew up in West Texas where I'm supposed to play football. And when I told my dad I'm playing soccer instead of football, it broke his heart. I think he called me a communist. Anyway,
That would be a West Texas thing to do for sure when you
exactly.
hear that.
Without further ado, Yuji, welcome to the podcast, my man.
Thank you. Yeah, in Japan, it's being a soccer player is it's very a common thing. So
Yeah. Soccer and baseball, right?
Yeah, soccer, baseball, a little bit. Right now, it's basketball is coming up.
Yeah.
So that's three big ones. And judo, kendo, it's traditional Japanese
Yeah,
sports.
of course, right?
Mhm.
So,
Yeah.
Yuji, give us your background of why you decided to go into exercise physiology, and then why you specifically really want to start looking at blood flow restriction.
Yeah, for sure. So I was always interested in working in the sports, and then that's the reason why I wanted to study exercise science or even like a sports management. I just wanted to involve with the sports and exercise. And then I tried to go to one of the kind of pretty good college in our city. It's called Tsukuba University, but couldn't get in. And I failed. And my mom is very open-minded. And why don't you look for just go abroad instead of like a year of like just studying? Maybe it's better to just go out there and then learn something new. And then I start looking at it and then use the kind of looking for the like study abroad opportunity, and the US came to in my mind and apply multiple college, and then kind of get into the Ohio Dominican University. And then it's like so another thing is like I was kind of playing on the idea of going to sports management and exercise science, but I kind of get to experience with data collection with my former kind of advisor, Dr. Kayat. So he was at the time Ohio Dominican. Right now it's in University of Indianapolis. And then he was kind of introducing, do you guys interested in kind of get into the research? I'm trying to get participants and somebody to help me. And I'm like, I'll do it. So he was doing some practical buffer restrictions and kind of proprioceptions. If you do practical buffer restriction, how's impact the joint proprioception? It's like looks cool. And then I did some research with him, and then go to the conference and NSCA, the regional ACSM, and then I loved it. And then it's cool, and like just the physiology, and then physiology involved with buffer restriction. I thought really cool.
Yeah.
So when I was kind of reading a lot of articles in buffer restriction literature for my undergrad kind of thesis in a way, that I saw Dr. Loenneke's name a lot. It's all the citation is almost like Dr. Loenneke's.
I know, me too.
Yeah, so like I need to reach out to him if I can study under him. And luckily, he had a sports for me, and then be able to kind of get into OMS and then study further exercise physiology and buffer restrictions, all the sort of cool stuff.
Nice, man. Yeah, and what a great place to land, being there at Ole Miss and getting into Jeremy's lab. So that's perfect. I don't know, do you know the story of how I met Jeremy at all?
I kind of briefly hear, but I'm not sure like this is
Yeah,
accurate.
well,
So
we were looking at this for the military and the Department of Defense a long time ago, and we kept seeing one name come up over and over, and it was Jeremy. And so Jeremy and then a couple of other folks that we saw in the literature were from the military side. He was one of the first people we reached out to be like, can you tell us what the hell this blood flow restriction thing is? And so you know, that was over probably a decade and a half ago when we first reached out to him, and he was kind of really crucial and beneficial in helping us start applying this to combat casualty care. So let's get into this paper that you have coming out, and I kind of want to get your take on why you went down this road, and there's some things you'll probably need to explain to us of what you're looking at exactly. So I'll give the title here. It's the role of the muscle metaboreflex on cardiovascular responses to submaximal resistance exercise with different pressures and modes of BFR. It's under review, like we said, but it's in applied physiology, nutrition, and metabolism. And so can you first define what the metaboreflex is, and also what you were kind of looking for in the design of this study?
Yeah, for sure. So muscle metaboreflex is maybe you can think of the sensory feedback to kind of modulate the neural kind of the autonomic system. So it's very sensitive to metabolites. So once you perform the exercise, there's going to be the kind of developments or accumulations of the metabolites, which is something like ATP, inorganic phosphate, lactate, hydrogen, hydrogen ions, something like that. So there is the neurons that are sensitive to those metabolites, sending the feedback to the cardiovascular center, so which is typically medulla oblongata or brainstem area. And then kind of make a modification of the autonomic nervous systems, typically increasing the sympathetic tones, and then decreasing the parasympathetic tones. So which typically lead to increase in blood pressure and heart rates.
Yeah, so as you do an exercise, the more metabolites you build up, the more you might kick off the metaboreflex, and the higher hemodynamics would go, then blood pressure and heart rate, right?
Yeah.
What
exactly?
And then a mechanoreflex, it's different sensors. Can you explain what that is?
Yeah, so mechanoreflex is the sensory from the kind of pressure and the mechanical stimulus. So it is coming from the muscle moving and the joint is moving. And also maybe if you are performing the buffer restriction, the kind of pressure sensation from the cuff is also influencing the mechanoreceptor.
Right.
So these are also important feedback system for the autonomic nervous system too.
So what were you wanting to look at with this paper then, of figuring out if the metaboreflex is involved in BFR, and if so, what parameters change it?
Yeah. So what we interesting is if we kind of modify how much metabolites is in working muscle by changing the pressure applied to the limb, so higher, lower pressure, and also like changing the kind of mode of blood flow restriction, something like the continuously applying the blood flow restrictions during exercise versus intermittently. So kind of splashing the metabolites during the resting period, but applying the same pressure, but not during the resting period. So this kind of tests the blood flow restrictions and the how much metabolites actually in the working muscles is affecting the cardiovascular response.
Right.
So that was going to be kind of main outcome. And then we wanted to also kind of connect the dot with muscle Metaboreflex. So this is typically tested by like a non-invasive technique called post-exercise circulatory occlusions. Kind of people say like a PICO as well.
Pico is more fun to say than the long.
Yeah, I know. PICO is kind of cute name too, I feel like.
Yeah.
Yes. So essentially that's the complete occlusion of the limb after the exercise, and then kind of trapping the metabolite within the brain, within the muscles, and then kind of isolating the muscle metaboreflex from other kind of sensory feedback in a way.
And we generally know that if we use a higher pressure with blood flow restriction, we should cleave off more metabolites compared to a lower pressure. And for sure, if we're opening it up during the rest periods, those metabolites flush out. And so you kind of have a washout period and then can bring them back. And I guess those are your conditions: a low pressure, a higher pressure, an intermittent pressure, just low load, and then a control, right? Was that the
Yes.
5? Yep. Okay. Were you looking at this from a clinical kind of eye? Because, I just spoke at a sarcopenic conference yesterday. And a big question is tolerance of exercise in these populations. And one of the big ones is hemodynamics. And so when you guys are there at Ole Miss Lab, and I know a lot of it's mechanistic, are you coming at this from the angle of like, this is maybe how clinicians would change this for different populations, or it's just like, I just want to know if the metaboreflex is involved?
Yeah, more like second part. So it's not really for the clinical reasoning, more like ex-phys purpose. So like when we are looking at the literature, so there's no much connections between the muscle metaboreflex and then the cardiovascular response to blood flow restricted exercise. Even it's been talked about this concept like over and over again for like couple kind of decades. But there's no much study that actually tried to kind of experimentally investigate this. So that's one of the kind of driver for this paper.
Yeah, and that's, it's accepted. We teach it. The BFR always increases hemodynamics. It seems like more than low load. And then it's, how much does it do compared to high load? But we I think, have come at it more from a mechanoreflex perspective of reducing stroke volume and reducing arterial diameter and things like that. So I don't think we've leaned on as much of the metaboreflex, which is interesting because that's another variable that we can control. If I'm worried about a hypertensive, maybe I do keep the pressure lower or more for the metaboreflex side. Or I start looking at intermittent BFR in the early phases with someone like a heart failure or something like that. So I think that's pretty interesting. All right. When you do heavy load, are you getting a mechano and a metabo? Does one lean more to the other when you're getting this big exercise pressor reflex when you do a heavy load that you know of?
Yeah, I think there's going to be a greater mechanical stimulus for sure.
Yeah.
And then also there's it depends on how much repetitions or how much kind of effort is going to be involved. But typically there's going to be increase in muscle metabolic reflex as well, because pretty good amount of the metabolites is produced from the high load resistance exercise too.
Then of course you have rest periods with high load, so you get a washout as well.
Yeah.
All right, well, take us through like what you did with this study, and then let's go into your findings.
Yeah, for sure. So we recruited the participants around 56, but end up is 53. individuals. And then kind of first visit participant coming in and then finding the one arm strength testing on the like unilateral, so just one leg knee extension exercise. And then we did a performance testing, so like local muscular endurance test with buffer restrictions. So which is like only 2 sets of the kind of until task failure, and then this going to 1 minute or less in between. And then kind of wanted to see like the individual endurance capacity with buffer restrictions. So that we wanted to ensure that nobody is reaching to failure. I wanted to make sure it's submaximal by applying the 70% of the maximum repetition people perform.
Smart.
Yeah. So because if you apply 30, 15, 15, 15, some people might reach to failure. And then if we use the kind of approach that, hey, let's do buffer restriction and then try to match the repetition with non-BFR, and then it's not randomized.
Right.
And then, okay, let's bring people to the failure, and then might not be able to see the effect of buffer restrictions.
Right.
So that's why we try to do this method. And then the exercise stimulus is going to be same in all the exercise conditions. The only difference is going to be the application of buffer restrictions.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's smart. Yeah. We know there's one thing involved here.
Yes.
Okay.
And then in the 2nd to 6th visits, so participants coming in and taking a blood pressure and then heart rates using the normal autonomic omron cuff, and then supine positions, and then move on to the exercise phases, kind of which already talk about 70% of maximum repetitions performed in the first visits. And then during the conditions, I think Johnny already mentioned that too. So one of the conditions applying the 80% of the arterial occlusion throughout continuously.
Mm-hmm.
Then another condition is 40% of arterial occlusion pressure. Then the third condition is going to be the 80% of arterial occlusion pressure, but only during exercise, so intermittently. So during the rest, we deflate the cuff, cuff pressure in a way. And then the fourth condition is loaded only exercise conditions. Cuff is applied, but no pressure is going to be kind of applied in there. Only cuff applied. And then no exercise control conditions, time matched. So just kind of sit on the knee extension machines to account for any error outside of the exercise.
Right.
And then it's kind of follow up with the kind of increasing the pressure to 150% of arterial occlusion pressure to trap all the metabolites within the muscles after the exercise. Kind of inflate it closer to the end of the second set so that we don't kind of miss the opportunity to kind of metabolites splashing out from the working muscles. So we start inflating kind of close to the end of the exercise in the second set. And then inflate it for 3 minutes and taking the blood pressure throughout around 4 times, 45 seconds interval-ish. And then deflate the cuff. And then the participant sit 3 minutes. And then again, taking the blood pressure and heart rates in around 45 seconds interval.
And that's the whole PICO, is that extra 3 minutes at the end, right?
Yeah, the PICO is going to be the circulatory occlusion phases. The kind of free flow recovery is we just wanted to see how fast the blood pressure and heart rate kind of go back to the baseline.
Yeah.
So we wanted to see the recovery period as well. Yeah.
Right.
It was quick too. It was almost like upon deflation, which I thought was interesting. I didn't really expect that.
No, I always thought it was going to be. I always thought it was a few minutes or a little bit. There was a drift.
Yeah, seemed like
how quick they went back.
Seemed like the exercise is really the variable there, huh?
Yeah,
it's interesting.
And you guys, Yuji, you did 30%, 1 RM. and you guys are still using a Hokinson device, right? So it's
Yes.
it gets good occlusion. It's a wide cuff, so we know you're getting really, you're not losing metabolites with a Hokinson or like a Delphi thing. Okay, what did you find?
So like kind of you guys mentioned, it's very interesting things. So just talking about blood pressure for right now. So after the pre and post blood pressure response, all the exercise increased blood pressure compared to no exercise control. But that was kind of what we expected. So the 80% conditions was the highest increase, followed by the 40% continuously, and then 80% intermittent. Was kind of similar to no the kind of exercise only conditions. So that's interesting.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then during the peak of period, that blood pressure kind of maintained very well. So during the times, there is no much like decreases, well maintained in the 3 minutes. After the deflation of the cuff, the blood pressure immediately go down in the first measurement of blood pressure. So like kind of 0 to 45 seconds around there. So then almost similar to control conditions. So that was the main findings of our studies. Yeah.
What about heart rate?
So on the heart rate was, so there was kind of shooting up the heart rates after the first set, and then by the second set, kind of come back to the similar level as a control, but except 80% of AOP. So in 80% AOP conditions kind of kept elevated during the PICO conditions, but other exercise conditions was very similar to no exercise control. And then after the deflation of the curve, the low load with the intermittent, and then 40% of LP kind of shoot it up at the heart rates, kind of a little bit kind of similar level to 80% of the ALP conditions. And then the recovery was a little bit slower compared to blood pressure. So they came back around 2 minutes and 15 seconds-ish after the deflation of the curve.
Interesting.
Yeah.
What's your conclusion then on the metaboreflex?
Yeah, so our conclusion is that so there was the increase in blood pressure and well maintenance during the PICO period. And then we saw the immediate drop in the blood pressure. So kind of indicates the this increase and then deflating the curve and then reduction. So this indicates when the metabolites dropped, the blood pressure is kind of keep elevated, then once it's replenished and then decreases. So this indicates the kind of significant low of muscle metabolic flex for kind of cardiovascular response to blood restricted exercise, especially kind of the BFR is applied continuously and then the higher pressure.
Yeah.
Mm.
In an elderly population, I thought you might have mentioned this. Do we see that they have a higher potential metabolite buildup that we would need to be concerned with from oxidative stress and things like that?
Yeah, I think that's one of the concern for older individuals or the participants or the individual with cardiovascular complications like hypertension or heart failure. So those individuals might have kind of impaired kind of sensory feedback mechanisms, not just muscle metaboreflex, but like arterial baroreceptor reflex and others. So these individuals have some kind of exaggerated the muscle metaboreflex. So for that, might need to be a little bit cautious of like higher blood pressure. Maybe the lower side or potentially like intermittent blood flow restrictions might have a lower cardiovascular response compared to applying a higher kind of end of the blood flow restrictions.
Do we think BFR works if we do it intermittently, based on what we've seen out there so far? That's the question. I've had debates with all sorts of people. It flies in the face of what I believe, but I don't know. I'm starting to see maybe there could be a reason, but really my only reason it'd be a hemodynamic response.
Yeah, so my take is not really confident that intermittent work kind of similar to continuous or just like high load. The reason why is there's studies kind of
And you said you're not very confident that it would work?
Not really confident.
Good.
Because the studies kind of investigating the kind of the study I have read so far is muscle kind of growth and then the strength adaptations to the continuous intermittent and then the no restrictions. And then all the study I have read so far don't have cannot really conclude well because of there is a main effect, but don't have the non-exercise control conditions.
Mm-hmm.
So the muscle growth, hypertrophy, and strength is actually like going above the like random noise. We don't know yet. And then there is a preliminary finding that my work's kind of similar to continuous buffer restrictions, but I think there's more study needed to kind of investigate with kind of larger sample sizes and then with no exercise control conditions.
It would make it a lot easier, but yeah, I think we're in that. We don't know. And oh hell, there we go. Kyle's going to chime in on this.
No, I don't hold a strong opinion. I think that what in the end, like you would just need to see, does it accelerate failure or accelerate fatigue, right? Like
it might more sets or reps needed.
Yeah, I think that's that's kind of my expectation if you're doing intermittent, where, and so I think some of the studies too, like where Yuji, they only did 2 sets, so they only had really 1 rest period.
Mm-hmm.
And that rest period was a minute, right, Yuji?
Long.
Yep.
So, you have to kind of wonder too, well, maybe will that minute time frame allow more metabolites maybe to kind of leak out in the deflated kind of time period? You wonder, like, if it had been shrunk to 30 seconds, would there may have been like a little bit of difference there? I don't know. I'm just kind of conjecturing, but I think too, like when you talk intermittent, there's so much under that, because it could be every single rest period. It could be maybe just like the middle rest period to give people like a little bit of a break. It could depend on how long are the rest periods, like here might potentially maybe could have affected that a little bit. So I think in the end, it's just a strategy maybe that we potentially use to introduce people to, something that we know for sure works and is very kind of predictable in terms of, we know what load we kind of need to hit, we know what pressures we kind of need to hit, and we know that if you do those things, it's going to take a certain amount of reps to make you very tired. Which I thought was also kind of interesting, Yuji, on you guys' end, because you did the performance piece. I believe you did 80% pressure, 30% load, 2 sets to failure, right? And then you went at 70% of that load, which ended up with reps of around 29 and was it like 7 or something?
Yep.
For the submaximal kind of stress that you were giving people. So you had people failing at what numbers then? Do you happen to recall that? That's like off the top of your head, like where they were on average failing? Was it around like 35, 40 reps, maybe somewhere in there?
And then, I think around 30 for the first set.
Around 30.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, I think just all of that is kind of interesting, and I don't know where I was kind of going with that angle, but was
Yeah.
just thinking about the acceleration of failure and that kind of thing. I got lost in starting to
Yeah.
talk about the details of the study.
Yeah, Kyle,
It's Sunday, man. You know.
yes, yeah, Kyle, it makes sense. 'Cause I think that's something the reviewer brought it up about why you guys doing 1 minute. It's not really conventional, and then the one of the reason why is we also wanted to take a kind of midpoint blood pressure response.
Mhm.
So we thought that it's something there, which was something for the heart rate. So it's glad that we included. But it's 1 minute because it like blood pressure measurements takes about like 30 to 45 seconds, depends on the persons. So we wanted to like 30 seconds to show to take the blood pressure.
Yeah.
And our previous study, we used the 30 seconds.
Right.
But for this study, we used 1 minute, which kind of a little bit longer period, the muscle, the kind of metabolites might splash a little bit better than 30 seconds. So if you kind of use the kind of shorter period and then doing an intermittent, potentially like you might be able to kind of accelerate some of the metabolic stimulus compared to just not doing any restriction during exercise. So yeah, so that's one of the kind of take for that too.
Yeah. I wondered, I was kind of curious too, like I was just thinking about, okay, this is like I thought it was a cool study from the perspective of it's kind of the first of its kind. Nobody's really ever tried to do this. And so I thought like the methods, like when you think of it from that perspective, the methods made perfect sense. Like I know in your limitations, you talked about, one limitation is you didn't actually measure metabolites. So you don't really for sure know. But you also kind of have an indication in the results that might be what's going on. And so then you could use this to kind of justify like, hey, now we need you to pay us some money so we can afford to do this study where we're going to measure these metabolites, stuff like that,
But needle involved.
Yeah. But I also thought too, like there might be another study in there where maybe you have one group that's occluded just during the rest period and another that's just occluded during the exercise period. And that might be kind of interesting to sort of see, is there any sort of difference there? Does that light load control, accumulate some metabolites that kind of make a difference? And you could kind of compare that. So I thought there's just like room in there to still be able to go back and tease out, which I thought was cool.
Do you think there's a stepwise progression? Because a lot of times we live in this 60 to 80% LOP in the lower extremity.
Yeah.
That if we did 60%, we would see less metaboreflex compared to 80%, compared to 40%.
Okay. Yeah, I think 60 might be the kind of sweet middle spot. Yeah, between 40 to 80. So I think if he applied like 60%, we might see like kind of the blood pressure response might be in the middle of the 40 to 80. So I think that's going to be some stepwise.
Yeah.
But I think there's going to be some plateau occurs closer to 80%. Maybe closer to like, maybe 70, 75, or like above 80. So if you apply 80, kind of 90, 95, very closer to occlusion pressure, we might start seeing a plateau in the cardiovascular response. But don't really know. Like I think there is some study done with the blood flow restrictions during exercise, and then see the different pressure applied. And then that's done in kind of dog as well. And then it seems like 60% is the time the metabolic reflex kind of occur. So maybe around there might be it kind of start occurring more than 40%, but not as much as 80%.
Yeah. I mean, it makes sense, but that could be an easy starting point for some of our clinical patients that we might be worried about. Is there a training effect? We see that people tolerate BFR over time, and usually it's just because they get used to the freaking tourniquet which sucks, and they understand how that feels. But then they're also, there's been some work, Denny Christensen has shown, this almost like buffering of lactate over time if you train with blood flow restriction. Do you think you could train down the metabolite buildup?
I think this one study actually tried to investigate that using a hand grip exercise with blood flow restrictions, and they measure the muscle metabolite before and after the training. I think they see something with the baseline blood pressure, but I don't think for during the PICO period.
Okay.
So I don't really I need to look at the study again. But there might be some training effect, but that study didn't include no exercise control too. So I'm not sure, to be honest. But I kind of makes sense that like as you train, you might see less metabolites develop if you assuming that you are kind of training same kind of exercise stimulus, and then maybe you might kind of get better with lifting the weights. And then
that's kind of where I was thinking, Yuji, is, like I wonder if there is a training effect, if that might be sort of like an early marker of, hey, the load needs to be progressed, or something needs to happen on the exercise side of things to make this a little bit more challenging for this system. So that's where you start, maybe you get a little jazzed about like real-time lactate sensors and things like that. Potentially, if we could grab that info, maybe that's just like, okay, now this person's ready to progress, even though we might say, well, we're not quite at 4 weeks or whatever time frame we kind of think about.
I think that's important. That's a very interesting points of like maybe don't have to do like lactate, but also look at the cardiovascular response to blood flow restrictions as a marker of are you kind of adapting to the stimulus, and maybe do we need a little bit more progressions in the training or not? So I think that's interesting take. But also it's important to note that the adaptation to blood flow restricted exercise might differ between like muscular and the cardiovascular adaptations, like especially for the pressure. It could be pressure dependent for cardiovascular adaptations. Muscular seems to be okay having like wide ranges as long as you are exercising pretty with high effort. But vascular adaptation, I think our study, Mauser, he's the first author, we saw the pressure dependence, higher AOP tend to kind of produce the greater adaptation to the vascular conductors.
That was the one that everybody was like, where did this paper from 1936 come from?
Oh, that was
the Mauser paper.
Grant?
Yeah. That was so funny.
Well, this is interesting. There's a couple of other papers I'd like to talk on too, but I think wrapping this in a bow, when your patients are building up those metabolites, that is increasing hemodynamics. And from the clinical side, it's something that we'll definitely have to think about. And it's another variable that we can control. We can control with pressure, or we can control with releasing the cuff completely. And so more things.
I did want to, one thought I had, Johnny, too, that maybe it's helpful for us to discuss. We haven't really talked about the magnitude of these changes. Like they're significant, but I think the magnitude's pretty important too. And also the fact that it's submaximal. I think we got to kind of remember that as well. So the magnitude of change here really, like on the systolic side, Yuji, it's, I don't know, maybe there's 10 millimeters of mercury difference really between your control group and low load versus your continuous high pressure, I think.
Yeah. So
if I'm just kind of looking at the graph and interpreting that.
I think around 18-ish for high load, like a high pressure, and then around 15 or 10 for the exercise only conditions.
Yes.
So yeah. So that's
Yes.
That's like, it's not too much compared to just not doing any exercise.
Right.
So yeah, I glad that you mentioned about magnitude. So people are very kind of cognitive about, so buffer restriction might be dangerous because of the cardiovascular response, but it's might be pretty comparable to like performing a normal free flow exercise. But but caution might be needed for some people might have cardiovascular complications or previous history of like cardiovascular events. But the magnitude, considering the some max protocol as well, but it's not really. It's like
It's not huge.
10 to 20. It's not like fatal, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's, at the upper end, you're 80% continuous. It's really just a diagnosis of hypertension.
Yeah, it would be
140 over 90.
Yeah.
So you just barely even kind of got into that range. You wonder, like, okay, it's submax, so what do those last two sets do? But also, I just think of it from the perspective of the duration of time that magnitude is kind of achieved. Even if you had spiked and let's say you're up around 160 over something, the duration of time that it's elevated also is very short. Versus, I don't know that we really know, but when you lift heavy, blood pressure definitely goes up substantially, and then potentially is elevated for longer as well. So I think those, it's just kind of important that we are thinking about all of those things when we're talking about this stuff.
Yeah, I think that's important too. Like recovery was pretty quick too.
Yeah. That's something Dr. Loenneke has always kind of really touched on. And I've never really quite understood why he's emphasized that, but he's always kind of emphasized like you recover quick, like the blood pressure is coming down. It's not like it's staying up. So,
well, and we're always looking for a training effect for hypertensives, and so is this rise, because we know cardiovascular endurance exercise would be something we'd want to do for someone with a blood pressure condition. And so is something we can use for a training effect, knowing that it goes right back to baseline when they're done. And chronic use, maybe we are lowering blood pressure. Because I know Jeremy's pretty interested in hypertension and hand grip stuff as well.
Yeah.
I don't know if you know any of that stuff, Yuji, if you want to touch on it.
Yeah, for sure. Like we kind of completed the hand grip study with buffer restrictions too, and looking at the resting blood pressure response, and it's almost coming out. So maybe hopefully you guys can lead that too.
Come on, just tell us the
He's already trying to get back on the podcast. What are we doing?
But it's for us couldn't really see the reduction in the blood pressure response. So which might be, it's like when we looking at the literature, isometric hand grip protocol, they do like maximum like hand grip strength testing, followed by like I think 3 or 4 sets of the like 30% of the like kind of isometric hold for 2 minutes, which is pretty intense. But I think the kind of updating the maximal strength might be very important for the training stimulus, which we didn't do that for the kind of the 30% of training protocol with buffer restrictions. So the progression might be needed for reducing the blood pressure over time. But I think that's one of the things is the kind of acute response is important. Like some people, the sympathetic activity goes down. After the exercise, kind of go back down, and then parasympathetic activity kind of tones go increasing. The kind of the autonomic modulation. If you keep doing that, maybe we can kind of fix the kind of over exaggerate like sympathetic. I cannot speak that one. Sympathetic.
It's a tough
ones.
One.
Yeah, there's tough ones. like kind of activity to bring back to normal. So that might be one of the mechanisms that kind of driving the reduction in the blood pressure over time. Yeah.
You guys also looked at hypoalgesia with hand grip. Do you
Yeah,
know
yeah.
that paper and kind of what your thoughts are on it?
Yeah, that's hypoalgesia effect. We actually did a lot in hand grip and
Yeah.
also
Jeremy
knee
got on a real
extension.
hand grip kick. Seemed like there was a lot
Yeah,
of stuff coming
yeah,
out. It's really fascinating.
we did it because that was COVID era and couldn't really do much like, the dynamic exercises, and it's very easy to control, like um from like the perspective, like people can wear a mask and then do exercise hand grip. Yeah. So
Smart.
we saw the reductions, or like I would say the reduction in the pain sensitivity. So which is the kind of increase in the pressure pain threshold.
Right.
So it's one of the marker for like how sensitive to the pain. And then we saw the kind of increase in the pressure pain threshold, so reduction in the pain sensitivity by performing the hand grip exercise with the blood flow restrictions and also non-blood flow restriction condition as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
no difference between the groups.
Yeah, I think so. I believe so. But so our problem was okay, and we did the similar thing in knee extension exercise with blood flow restrictions until failure.
Mhm.
And then so we saw the similar response again. So there is increasing in the pressure pain threshold, which is the kind of exercise-induced hyperalgesia. But there was no difference between the exercise without blood flow restrictions. Then we thought that, oh, this is like failure protocol might be missing the blood flow restriction effect. So that's the reason why the first paper we actually tried to use the submax blood flow restriction protocol is that paper, I think Hammert 2024. Yeah. So that paper we tried to use the kind of similar strategy we already talked about, try to make very submaximal and try to see the effect of blood flow restrictions. And then we saw the blood flow restrictions with exercise with blood flow restrictions had the greatest increase in the hypoalgesia compared to the submax exercise only conditions. And even like kind of we also had another conditions. Okay, so maybe because of the effort. So we had the muscle endurance test without the blood flow restrictions. And then we try to see the 70% of it. So its effort is matched. So they perform essentially the greater repetition compared to blood flow restriction conditions.
Mhm.
But still, the BFR kind of beat the condition as well. So kind of showing the blood flow restriction doing something for exercise-induced hyperalgesia.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we're coming to that consensus. And as Jeremy, I know he's pointed out on our podcast that it's one of the things with blood flow restriction, we can probably say there's a systemic effect. We're seeing pain pressure threshold changes at distal regions after we do this, which is pretty awesome.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's kind of interesting point of like kind of systemic effect. So which also we've been kind of curious and then try to kind of implement that. And we are very interested in the like high load with buffer restriction too. So
Oof.
the systematic systemic effects might be kind of driving the blood pressure, blood flow restriction effect on the high load. So which is kind of some study has done like recently Roke and then other colleagues done that before. We are very interested in that too.
Yeah. No, it's fascinating.
I'm not signing up to be that subject.
Yeah, that one's gonna suck.
Heavy load with BFR, no, thank you.
It's quick though. It's not going to be.
That's true. You don't have to.
Yeah.
It is quick. It's quick for sure. It's a good point.
Yeah.
Kyle, did you have any other papers that Yuji was on that you wanted to touch base on? And we can.
The only thing I was kind of curious about, and forgive me, Yuji, if this is too into the weeds, but
Oh, here we go.
mechanistically, just thinking about that hypoalgesia effect. I know, like, for example, Luke and Steven over at St. Mary's had kind of put out, they thought, all right, the options really are kind of your endogenous opioid or endogenous cannabinoid productions, or maybe just like the discomfort of the exercise. And then the other they had put out was perhaps the blood pressure response. And if I remember correctly, you guys put out a similar paper, but kind of pushed back on maybe the blood pressure side of things and didn't feel like that was kind of one of the things that really was on the table. So I was just kind of curious your thoughts there and how y'all arrived at that.
Yeah, Kyle, thank you. That's really good questions, I think.
Oh, was
We
it?
are curious. Yeah, I think so.
Thank you,
We
Yuji. I would love to have you on again.
yeah. Because we were curious also mechanisms too. So
Yeah.
I think the Dr. Peterson paper, Dr. Hughes Luke,
Yep.
so like kind of mediations by the muscle discomfort and then the endocannabinoid systems.
Yep.
And then, but in our study, we didn't see the mediations from kind of increasing the blood pressure, which is also one of the another mechanisms of kind of modulating the arterial reflex sensitivity, which is got a very similar location to the kind of pain receptor and then the pain center, and then cardiovascular center is located in the brainstem area. So that's why we are curious, but was not mediated. And then also by like for our analysis, the muscle discomfort itself didn't really mediate the pressure pain threshold as well. And then, but also we also measured the the tolerance, the ischemic tolerance for the 2024 paper. We have some interesting finding that too. I think there was the tolerance didn't change, but I think muscle discomfort kind of mediated in some ways that I need to like read again, to be honest. But the mechanism itself is a little bit kind of interesting, and I think the endogenous opioid and the cannabinoid is the ones driving the most.
Me too.
This
Woo.
I think discomfort, I'm not sure,
Yeah.
to be honest, right now. Yeah, and as well as blood pressure. And then we are also curious in this project, we talk about Metaboreflex paper.
Yeah.
We also measure the pressure, pain threshold, and perceptual response, which also I'm writing the paper right now. So hopefully it's going to kind of send it out soon as well.
Nice.
And the endogenous opioid bacterial metaboreflex, I mean, that can be metabolite driven. So
Yeah.
that's where we go the opposite direction. Maybe we want to decrease metaboreflex with pressure. We want to increase the analgesia by increasing pressure to build up metabolites, maybe in our post-op patients and things like that.
Yeah, so that was the kind of thought about, so muscle metabolites also kind of important for the hypoallergesic effect and then also perceptual response. So we look at that in this project as well. And
Sweet.
yeah,
I'm ready to
I'm
hear that.
kind of curious too, Yuji. Thinking back to the main paper we were discussing today, and just considering all the different variables that kind of come into play when we start talking about increases in heart rate and blood pressure in response to exercise. And I think something that as clinicians we have to really be mindful of, at least, is your paper is unilateral exercise with an isolated muscle, essentially. And exercise can look like a lot of different, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You could be on that same machine but doing bilateral BFR, and now you have two muscles kind of going. Versus there's one paper where they had a leg press where the legs were elevated, and that paper showed like hemodynamic responses were kind of the same between heavy load and BFR. So I think, it's important to kind of make sure like our listeners kind of understand like what are we really kind of talking about in terms of the type of exercise used and what we see. And then kind of considering the fact that as you start adding different types of exercise, bilateral versus unilateral, multi-joint versus single joint, all those things may kind of come into play and have an influence over
being
what
in the
happens.
diaphragm, like Annie pointed out. Stressing will increase blood
What's
pressure.
crazy, Johnny, is it's kind of where I was going too, is I thought that was such an important point that Annie brought up when she was on the podcast, the Valsalva, and I haven't really seen that. I don't feel like I've seen that discussed really in the BFR literature in terms of what might actually be kind of influencing the hemodynamic response. So anyway, Yuji, that was, I didn't really ask a specific question, but you can riff off of that, I'm sure.
I think that's good points. Like a respiratory kind of compensations in a way. So I think one of the paper look at with blood restriction, and then that was kind of cycling, and then there is going to be increase in the ventilations if you do blood restrictions. So that's typically the kind of compensatory kind of mechanisms to kind of, I don't know, reduce the like kind of amount of increase in the cerebral blood flows, or like, I don't know, modulations of it. So try to not pass out in a way by just breathing out CO2 more. And then that study, I think if you try to like kind of clamp the CO2, there was the more like noticeable effect of the changes in the cerebral blood flow or something like that. So I think that's something to it, blood restrictions, and kind of typically we try to increase the breathing to kind of keep the how do you say, the homeostasis. So try not to kind of pass out, and then be able to exercise further.
Good point. Well, man, Yuji, this is good stuff, brother. As always, y'all are churning out interesting and great things down there at Ole Miss. You're beating the Georgia Bulldogs. I mean, it's just like high times down there. Let's go, baby. We appreciate you coming on. Once this paper comes out, we'll definitely promote it and put it out there for you. And so I think it'll get a lot of good interest. So my clinical brain's already thinking of it with some of my elderly studies and elderly patients that we'll be working with. So appreciate you, man.
Thank you so much for having me. And then this is kind of first podcast, but it was really fun to kind of talk with you guys. Amazing.
You lost your podcast virginity today. I'm so glad. You're welcome.
I'm glad that I lost it with you guys. So that was the honor.
Kyle's involved. You might want to go over to the clinic and get tested after this and make sure.
Okay.
There's nothing bad. All right, man. Appreciate you, Yuji. You take care, brother.
Of course.
Thanks, Yuji.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to the Owens Recovery Science Podcast. Owens Recovery Science is a single source for PTs, OTs, ATCs, DCs, MDs, and other medical professionals seeking certification in personalized blood flow restriction rehabilitation training. Find them online at owensrecoveryscience.com.
One last thing before we get out of here. First, want to say a sincere thank you for listening all the way through, but also wanted to remind you that this podcast should not be considered medical advice. It is strictly entertainment. It's a way for us to try to keep up with what is ongoing within the BFR world. If you require some sort of medical attention, medical advice, please seek that from a licensed individual within your state. Thanks, and we'll talk to you soon.